What's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video we are going to be incorporating some soft texture and painting these oranges. The brushes that I am using today are the monoline brush, the soft airbrush, and then several of the texture stamps from Glanz's Delicious Texture Brush Pack. If you want to use texture brushes that you already have, you totally can. If you want to get these brushes, you can find them linked below. Let's get into it. So to start off, I have 6 layers. I have 2 orange layers, 2 leaves layers, and a background layer. I'm going to be adding in layers later for clipping masks, but this is what I'm starting with. On my first orange layer, I'm using the monoline brush from the calligraphy panel, and I'm grabbing this mid-orange. I'm going to draw a circle and tap one finger to the screen to create a perfect circle and adjust the size. Then I'm going to use color drop to fill, so I'm tapping my circle and dragging over. At the top, there is a blue bar indicating the color drop threshold. If you move it further over, it'll fill the entire screen. If you move your pencil to the left without lifting, it'll fill less. So if you're running into issues with it filling the entire screen, check what the color drop threshold is. You might have to undo and redo. Then on my second orange layer, I am doing the same, this time drawing a slightly bigger orange, tapping a finger to the screen to make it a perfect circle. And then I am going to move the entire layer contents, which is currently just this one circle, by tapping this selection arrow here, and I'm dragging it up a little bit. Then I'm tapping the arrow again to deselect, and I will drag and drop that color as well. Now on my upper leaves layer, I am choosing this minty lighter green, still on the monoline brush, and here I am drawing in some leaf shapes under my oranges. Now I want to hide my oranges quickly so I can check to make sure that my shapes are filled, because I am going to be dropping color in here as well. If the shapes aren't completely closed, the color will fill the whole screen. It won't look as good. So now that I've done that, I can show my oranges again and use color drop to fill these leaves. And then on my lower leaves layer, I am doing the same, this time layering in. Now, with the initial shapes drawn, we can start to layer in some clipping masks. So starting with the very top orange, I'm going to add a layer, tap the layer to bring up this side menu, and then tap clipping mask. And then I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply, because this is going to be a darker color that we're putting down. I'm going to duplicate my clipping mask, and then change the blend mode of this to overlay. Then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate both of these layers, move them down to in between these 2 layers, and make them clipping masks above my second orange. So now I have 4 total clipping masks, 2 on top of each orange, set as overlay and then multiply. On my very top orange, on the multiply layer, I'm selecting the same orange color that we painted with before to fill the initial shapes. And now I'm going to move to this texture stamps brush set, and these are all stamp brushes with texture varying in levels of coverage. So I'm going to grab the seared brush. The brush opacity I'm going to turn down to about 40%, and the size I have set to 20%. And if you need to remind yourself which orange is on top, you can just turn off the layer and turn it back on. So I know that it's this one. on this multiply layer, I am going to start tapping in to build up some shadow here along the side. And then I am turning my brush size down to about 10%, and I'm going to mostly tap off of the edge to add a little bit of this on the opposite edge. Turning my brush size back up to 20%, I'm going to move down to my second orange and do the same thing on this lower multiply layer. It takes several different passes to start to build up that darker color. And that's okay, because with texture, I think that building it up gradually is always better, and sometimes you'll get the best effects by working on that lower opacity and just being patient. Now I'm going to turn my brush size back down to 10 and use the brush mostly tapping outside of the shape area, so I'm just getting a little bit of the overlap of the brush. You can see from my brush stamp that it's just really hitting on the corner of the brush. And then I'm also going to layer in a little more color where the two oranges overlap. And now you can see I maybe added a little too much on this orange on this side here. So I'm going to use the eraser tool set on the same brush. So I'm just going to move to the eraser tool by tapping and holding on the eraser, and that'll bring me to erase with the same brush that I was painting with. So still on the seared brush. And I'm going to turn the opacity down here to about 40% as well. And the size I will bring down to about 15. And starting from the middle of the orange, I'm going to lift up some of this texture, not too much. Again, we want to work gradually. Now on the overlay layer, I am grabbing this light apricot color. Here I'm going to stay on this seared brush and working on the upper orange with my brush opacity set to 50%, brush size set to about 20. And this will give me a really lovely brightening effect. Now I will move on to my second orange on the overlay layer, keeping my brush settings the same. Next, I'm going to move down to my leaves layers. First, I am going to add in 2 layers, and I'm going to make both of these clipping masks. Then I am going to change the layer blend mode of the upper layer to overlay, the lower layer to multiply. Then I will duplicate both of these layers and reposition them, the duplicates, to be above my second leaves layer. Then I will make these both clipping masks as well. Above my first leaves layer on the multiply clipping mask, I am choosing the same green that I used before to paint the initial leaves and the seared brush still. Opacity I'm keeping at 50%, and the brush size here I'm setting to around 12-13%. To remind myself which leaves these are, I'm going to fully turn off my lower leaf layer so that I can tell exactly where I need to be painting. And then again, I am going to slowly build up this color, tapping somewhat off of the edge to let the stamp brush overlap just slightly with the leaf. Now I'm going to switch to this darker green. I'm changing my brush opacity to about 15%, and I'm stamping in a bit of this darker color as well, just to enhance it a bit. Now I'm turning back on my lower leaves layer and I'm going to move on to the multiply layer that sits as a clipping mask above that. Using the same green that I painted the leaves with initially, I am changing my brush opacity here back to about 50% and tapping to build up some texture here. Now I'm switching to that much darker green and I'm changing my brush opacity. This one I'm going to change down to about 22%, and this will allow the color to build up a little bit more. Because this is the underside layer, that's exactly what I want. This will just help increase the contrast between the two sets of leaves a little bit more. Now moving on to my overlay layer above my first set of leaves. Here I am choosing just a solid white. I am increasing my brush opacity back to about 50%. And here I will decrease my brush size to around 8%. This I am painting a lot more sparingly because it is such a high contrast. Even though the layer blend mode being set on overlay will help soften some of this contrast, I still want this to be subtle and to slowly build up. If you find that it's not being forgiving enough, you can always decrease your brush opacity even further, and that will allow the color to build up a little more slowly. Now I'm moving down to my second set of leaves on the overlay layer, keeping my brush settings the same. Next, I'm going to merge each element with its clipping masks. And now I want to brush in a little more highlight. So I am going to add a clipping mask above each layer, set to add and set to about 35% opacity, so really low opacity. I'm doing this once and then I'm going to duplicate the layer 4 times to layer each one on top. And then on each of these add layers, I'm setting them as clipping masks. And then on the topmost layer, I'm going to use the soft airbrush in the airbrushing panel with my brush size set to about 90%. My opacity I am decreasing down to about 25%. So using really light pressure, I'm painting in a curve that follows the outside edge of the orange, and then I'm adding a little extra in this circular motion, a little further in from this curve highlight. And then I will do the same on my second orange add layer. Now I'm going to pinch to merge all 4 of these. And then on my upper leaves add layer, I am decreasing my brush opacity to about 15% and my brush size to about 40. And I'm adding in just a very, very light, soft highlight on these upper leaves. Then on my lower leaves layer, on the add clipping mask above that, I'm doing the same. Then I'm going to pinch to merge these layers as well. And now on my background layer, I'm choosing this darker bluish mint color, and going back into the texture stamps, I'm going to choose some of these to put down some color and texture in the background. So I'm starting with this foiled stamp, which has a higher level of coverage, and I'm increasing the size to about 50%, and I'm keeping the opacity at 100, and I'm using this to stamp several times, leaving a bit of margin around some of the edges. Then I'm going to choose the lighter version of this, and using a brush that has some lighter coverage, I'm choosing the fried brush. I'm increasing the size almost to 100% and the opacity at 100%. And I'm going to stamp this in a few times all over the screen. Then my background color, I am going to set to this super dark teal color. Now on my background layer, I'm going to use the eraser tool on the poached stamp, and I'm setting my size here to about 50%, and I'm going to tap to then lift up some of this color, which also adds the texture of this stamp in the background. I'm primarily lifting from directly under the oranges to give this cool little vignette effect. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful. Hopefully you learned something. Let me know if you have any questions. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and be sure to subscribe for more. I put out new videos every Wednesday. Thank you again. I'll see you in the next one.